At one point in my life, I met Mother Teresa for 3 minutes. The reason it was only 3 minutes, even though we thought we were going to be with her with 45 minutes, is because we were Fulbright scholars at the Home for the Dying in Calcutta, and when the 3 minutes were up, she was like, I really need to be on that line serving soup, if you don't mind. And so the 3 minutes became 40 minutes. The 40 minutes rather became 3 minutes. But I have to say that experience lasted me for the long haul for 10 years. When I met His Holiness for the first time and was grateful to share the stage with him, that was another 10 years. So I hope this conference adds to that for you, because we have to keep taking those moments of time to recommit ourselves, to know what we're about, and to recommit ourselves. And when I was preparing for this talk, I remembered a wonderful thing that happened to me in New York City. I guess it was about 10 years ago. I don't know if Paul is still here, Paul Tuff, but he writes about Geoffrey Canada in his book, and I didn't really know that until this morning when I was glancing at his book. And what Geoffrey Canada is the head of Reedland Centers for Family Children in Harlem. And he has kids do a wonderful act of kindness every year. What he does is that in preparation for Valentine's Day, he has the young people in his after-school center actually figure out who are the people that they want to thank and be grateful for who are helping children. And they have to come up with at least 25 people, research it, etc. Then they make them cookies, and beside being an eloquent speaker, Geoffrey Canada is a poet, and he writes a poem, and then on that day, kids show up in your office with the baked cookies and the poem. It is a most amazing experience. It's almost like this is the millionaire, arriving. It's like, hello, are you Linda Lantieri? Yes, whatever. So I thought I'd read part of this poem. I don't know exactly why, but I'm going to trust it. And I feel like it's really about what we're here about today. And it's called Take a Stand. Maybe before we didn't know that Corey was afraid to go, the school, the store, to roller skate. He cries a lot for a boy of 8. But now we know each day it's true that other girls and boys cry too. They cry for us to lend a hand. Time for us to take a stand. And little Maria's window screens keeps out flies and other things, but she knows to duck her head when she prays each night for bed, because in the window come some things that shatter little children's dreams. For some, the hourglass is out of sand. Time for us to take a stand. And Charlie's deepest secret wishes is someone to hold him, smother him with kisses, and hold him tight, so tight, while he pretends to put up a fight. Or at least someone to be at home who misses him. He's so alone. Who allowed this child-forsaken land? Look in the mirror. Take a stand. And tonight some child will go to bed, no food, no place to lay their head, no hand to hold, no lap to sit, to give slobbery kisses to slobbery lips. So you and I, we must succeed in this crusade, this holy deed, to say to the children in this land, have hope. We're here, and we take a stand. Thank you, Geoffrey. I probably got that intuition because it's been pretty intense in the United States with these 3 young women who were only children practically when they were abducted, and 10, 12 years later, just what it is that is happening to our children is just really, really something that we need to continue to commit ourselves and recommit ourselves to. I began my teaching career in East Harlem. It was the same year Dr. Martin Luther King said to our country, where do we go from here? chaos or community. I was 20 years old. I went to a great undergraduate school, Hunter College, to be prepared to be a teacher, but not much prepared me for what I was in store for with those 37 young people. I was responsible for their hearts, their souls, their spirits, and their minds. And at that point, I knew that, by the way. It took me a while to figure out how to bring all of those dimensions into my teaching. But I would have to say, as I thought back this morning, I would say that I was there. I did know that. But by the early 90s, this is what was happening in the United States. Pretty serious statistic. You know, a classroom full of children being killed by violence every 3 days. And I began to take Gandhi at his word. I was a classroom teacher at the time in East Harlem. I was then an assistant principal in the same school. And I started to believe this, that this is the only way we're going to do it. We're going to have to begin with the children. And very much in isolation in the New York City schools, and I only found out later that PADS existed. We all started at a similar time, Committee for Children. You know, it was probably, when was PADS? 1980. Okay, so, you know, we started to think, is it possible to teach young people some of these skills that are being called soft skills, et cetera, but basically, schools are the last place in our environment where kids are showing up in large numbers. Can't we also think about equipping them with the other things that they might need? And it was really, for me, in response to the violence that was happening in the New York City schools and in the New York City streets. And then, in 1992, Dan Goldman, who was at the New York Times at the time as the mental health writer, had been researching and studying this idea of emotional intelligence. He had taken all of the research that probably would have stayed in Harvard and Yale and other places, and he was beginning to say to himself, there's a lot here that the public could be aware of that may make us feel quite differently about what we're doing. And lo and behold, I was an official at the Central Board of Education in New York City schools when I received the call that I had to run to a high school where there was the first in the country student who shot another student and killed him and critically wounded a teacher. And the chancellor told me that my car was downstairs, and I said, sir, excuse me, what is the school? And he said, Thomas Jefferson High School. It was my alma mater. There are no accidents. None at all. I went to the school, and needless to say, it was very, very intense, very sad. I'm not going to get into that part or aspect of it. But clearly, Dan Goldman knew he had to write about that the next day. It was national news, unfortunately. And it was the first of what was to be many, unfortunately. But it happened first in the New York City schools in 1992. And so I got a call late in the day. He said, I was hearing about this thing that you're doing in the New York City schools. I got very excited. This is Dan Goldman of the New York Times. Maybe he'll come and visit. Maybe this will happen. I was telling him about peace pledges, that each kid each week, does a peace pledge of what they're going to work on. Faxed them these peace pledges, right? And said, I'd love you to come visit, whatever. Next morning, we were the front page of the Science Times. And this was the story. And it plummeted this into exposing that some of us were, in fact, doing this work. And very soon after, his book was published. And of course, many of us know that it just began to change how we were thinking about things, not only in education, but certainly in other realms. And it's really what I say here. It gave us permission to talk about the power of the emotions. And in his book, he took the research from John Mayer and Peter Salovey, who's now, I'm happy to say, the president of Yale, and he began to get this definition that became the working definition and still is to this day. So you take a look at this definition and you see that a lot of the things we're saying, mindfulness can be cultivated and some results occur. You could see how far back some of this goes in its connection. And what started to happen is that the business world caught on really quickly, as what usually happens, by the way. It takes us as educators a long time to let somebody in, let's face it, right? Very few of people get in. Carol Dweck is doing nicely, you know, with the growth mindset and the fixed. That's going to probably be the next one, but we hardly let anybody in, especially if you're not an educator, into sort of the mainstream of education of what we think we should be doing in schools. And so the business world is always ahead, and they did a very large study, and interestingly enough, look what they found out. That 18 of these competencies that made a leader a star were things that had to do with emotional intelligence. Well, what do the Fortune 500 companies do now? They actually give people tests in emotional intelligence, and they make decisions between that person and that person because they know that they're not going to be able to teach them that when they get there. In fact, they would prefer not to, so that they could start learning some of the technical things that they might not know. In terms of schools, this is when the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning began. We were a very small group of people, very grassroots group of people. We had no idea there would be an organization today that was international, none whatsoever. And sometimes when you take those leaps of faith, I think it's great that we're not able to know the next steps, right? I mean, it just happened to me right now, you know, because it would be so overwhelming. What do you mean? I'm not even going to have a PowerPoint? You know, it would just be too much. And it was a little like that with us beginning Castle. But what happened, how many of you are familiar with this organization? Can you just do a show of hands? That is so wonderful. And probably if I asked you, how did you find out about it, and it wasn't Kim Shona Reichel, probably the same amount of hands would go up. And we want to thank you for that, Kim, really, that you've brought it to Canada. Absolutely. But this was Castle's big, wonderful opportunity that happened. Very early on, we were asked to do this book that was a collaboration of 7 of us, and we did it over the phone because we hardly used computers even at that point, or we certainly didn't have a shared document, that's for sure. And lo and behold, this kind of became the guide for the field. And for those of you that have not seen the book, know the book, it really still is a guide for the field, and it's a great guide for the field. And this is what happened. We had to come up with these famous components that forever now are there, although some of us are being brave and changing them around a bit, but we all come to the same kinds of things. These are some of the skills we're talking about. And for those of you now that know that I'm going too quickly, and definitely know it's because I'm from New York, I too will be giving my slides to you because I'm seeing the panic, you know, in some of your faces. It's like, no, don't sweat it, unless you like that style of writing, so it helps you remember, keep going, you know, but if not, not to worry. We know a lot about SEL. You know, I was wishing we had a little talk with Paul, because this morning as he was sharing, I wasn't so sure if he knew that there's been a whole series of studies that have told us some very important things about this work. In fact, this is what we know. And this is based on 243 studies, a meta-analysis. We know that when children have consistent teaching through a research-based curriculum in social and emotional learning, this is what you could expect to happen over a 2-year period, by the way. And so when you heard that I helped to found the Resolving Conflict Creatively program, and it's in 400 schools. That's an example of this. We were in this study. We not only found that out, but we did find out that there was an improvement in reading and math, and I always like to say as measured on standardized tests, which I don't believe actually show that. So that's how I like to report that research, right? But it's kind of nice that in those days it was like, who cares? And now today, this is the biggest news, that there was a correlation between those things. And there's some long-term effects we know about too, which is very big. Look at this. These people are now in their 30s and they're still being followed. And we also know that there's a big cost benefit as well. So there's a lot we know. And a lot of schools have moved in the social and emotional learning dimension. This is an example of one in New York City. And this could be repeated all over the country, all over the world. The good news is SEL is alive and well. But we've also got this statistic. We're still not doing great. And interestingly enough, I don't know if you caught the PBS special on TED Talks in education. Did anybody catch it? A few of you? Jeff Canada was on, and basically he started his speech by saying, I'm going to try not to be an angry black man. He said, but I'm angry, and the last I saw, I'm black, you know? And, but he said, and he put up a picture of his school, he said, I went there 56 years ago and things haven't changed yet. And I think most of us could have a picture of our school and kind of say the same thing, that when we know these examples that we think of, there's still exceptions. They're not the norm. They're not the norm. And it's because, for me, I mean, there's many, many reasons, but one of the reasons for me is this, that this paradigm we have, that we improve education by fixing the institutions, and we are reforming them. We're restructuring them. We're everything. This needs to be thrown out. You know, this is not about reform. To me, this is about transformation, if we're going to take the next step. And that's why I'm so excited about the mindfulness work, because I think it could help us move in that direction. Because Thich Nhat Hanh said it beautifully, if you want the tree to grow, it will not help to water the leaves. You have to water the roots. And Stephanie Payne Marshall just said such a beautiful thing in her book, The Power of Transformation. We need to transform our system of learning and teaching so that we water the roots of learning, not the leaves of schooling. And this transformation will not initially emerge through reinvention of social structures and so on, nor through reformation of policies and priorities and so on, but rather it will come from altering of mind, the transformation of human consciousness and the emergence of integral and wise minds. And what will happen if that happens? Creatively live in a new worldview of an interconnected and living planet and a sustainable and interdependent human family. Those are the kids I want to lead me into the next generation. So how do we get there? What does this vision look like? And how could we do it? How can we nurture ourselves and be ready and be there for the kids? In 2001, as some of you know, and the book is out there, I wrote the book Schools with Spirit, Nurturing the Inner Lives of Children and Teachers. It was an edited book, so others gave in articles and chapters. And I thought success would be if in about 5 years I had the title that I have today of my talk. I felt like I was really ahead of my time, and this book was going to kind of stay on the shelf of Barnes & Noble and not go really very far, but I was glad I did it. I felt like it was definitely the last holdout for me, that this last thing of kids' inner lives has got to start to be talked about. So I was very happy I did it. I had low expectations for it. However, it came out in August 2001, and 10 days later, this is what was happening in New York City. This is an actual drawing of a child who saw too much in one of the schools nearby. This is a drawing of a child who, 3 months later, was trying to say, couldn't something have happened? Couldn't we have done something to change it around? And this teacher who said, in that instant, I felt like I understood what it means to be a teacher, because I could run no faster than this little kindergarten girl could run. This principal is standing in her cafeteria. She's looking out at Ground Zero after she's returned 6 months later, and her sister was lost in the World Trade Center that day. So we were presented with something that I have to say, social and emotional learning started to feel like, I wouldn't say a Band-Aid. It was bigger than a Band-Aid, but it was certainly not going to solve what was going on. We needed to create a totally different reality for those teachers. And we had to create a reality that still allowed them to function in their worlds. And right away, people said, lots of money came that day. The September 11th Fund was formed at 1 o'clock on that day. And several months into it, I was approached by the head of the September 11th Fund who said that we have a lot of money for you if you would help the schools in Ground Zero recover. And I knew that we really had to start with the adults. Why? Because this is what I was seeing the adults do. They were trying to do so much to protect the kids from this adversity that they were doing what my friend Wayne Mueller calls doing good badly. And those that were helping needed lots of support at the deepest level of their lives. And so I said to this gentleman who is a dear friend, I said, Mariano, I really want to start with the adults, the parents, the teachers, the administrators. And he knows I tell this story, so I'm not sort of talking about him. He said, that's too bad. Because they were hoping I was going to help the 8,000 kids who ran for their lives. And it sort of was not what he wanted to hear. But I knew it was that we have to help ourselves first before we could actually be there for the kids. And so this was a Thursday, I think. He said, by next Wednesday, when you give in the proposal, can you make it sound scientific? And what happened for me is that I started to look at the work in the health field around compassion fatigue. And I began to understand how we could start balancing our inner lives so that we could be there for the kids, because they were beginning to have some understanding of that. And so what we personally started to do in New York City, and by the way, 400 educators that day did not go to their own children, think about that impulse, stayed with kids, and then each school, 11 schools, who lost communication with the other, were not impulsive and go to the school nearby, which was their emergency plan, but they all separately had the wisdom to either walk on the West Side Highway or the East Side Highway. Now tell me how that happens, right? You've got to start being pretty clear-minded and come to that place of center for that to happen, completely separately. And there was no danger, nothing happened to any of those kids or teachers. So when we started to work with teachers, we just started to do a lot of work with them at the self-care level. We went on retreats. We've just recently led our 40th retreat, which is a residential experience at a beautiful place that has things like labyrinths and walking meditation, et cetera. And we had lots of time that teachers could be talking with each other. And then, it was only 3 years in, the teachers finally said, but we have to give this to the kids. This is one of our lead trainers now in our Ohio district. We have to give this to the kids. And so we started to. We started to create the curriculum that really Building Emotional Intelligence, the book, is based on. And these are photos of some of the kids in action. But my question is the same. So will these kids be ready? You know, what does this mindfulness piece give us? Well, I think the first thing it does, and many of my colleagues have already shared this, is that this is the first movement in education that I know of that is basically saying you cannot skip to the kids with the new thing you have for us. You have got to start with the teachers. And I'm happy to say, I don't know how they didn't think of this sooner. I apologize for the whole public on this, that they don't get it, that if you invest in us, it's going to be a good investment because of the amount of kids we affect and all of that. But we just haven't gotten that in education. Somehow with this mindfulness piece, that's happening differently. All of my colleagues are coming to the same conclusion, I'm happy to say, that we came to. I mean, we waited 3 years. They had 3 years of their own transformational work before we ever had them do anything in the classroom. But we'd go much faster now, but we still start with them. And we believe in this self-directed model, that you can work on yourself if you're having transformational experiences, and you could get better at these things by being in that community and by learning these skills. And then, I think the other thing the mindfulness piece has given the world of education is that because mindfulness is more than a skill, it's a way of being, it's a disposition, it could be many things, but clearly it's something that doesn't happen just there. It happens here and here and here, etc. And so what it has given the field of social emotional learning is a much wider range of where these things could show up. So if we think about our model schools in our work, the work of mindfulness is showing up in all of these places, every single one of them. I mean, our principals actually sit and meditate before they're doing interviews for who might be teaching in their school. And they know that they take that time, they're going to maybe make a better choice about that. So it affects everything. And I think that's the work of this movement. I don't think SEL thought so holistically. We thought more, here are the skills in the classroom, let's follow this curriculum, you know. I think that many of us had a wider thought about it, but I think the mindfulness field is giving us like, no, you need to embody this to be part of this. You know, I just want to say that I'm not, oh yes, there it is. I have 1.2 minutes left. I was going to give an excuse that I can't see how many minutes I have, but I just saw it, unfortunately. The other thing is now I have to sort of see if my negotiation skills work, but anyway. This is another thing I feel that the field of mindfulness is helping us with. We've always known this connection. We've known it for a long time, that to be able to learn, you have to access your memory. To be able to access your memory, you have to be able to focus, and that our feelings are in the same part of the brain as our ability to focus. And as Dan Goleman said in EQ many years ago, if we have a flood of feelings, then good luck. It isn't that you're getting Alzheimer's, that you forgot this person's name. It's that you cannot access that because you're very stressed. I mean, I think it would have been so interesting to see if I could have calmed myself enough to say the whole poem without my notes, you know? Because it was there. I had memorized the poem, interestingly enough, but I don't know what would have happened. I'm glad I could look down at it just a little. It was kind of nice. But, I mean, I felt like we really greeted each other in a way that was real, so I was present. You know, all of those things helped. But I think this is really big in terms of what mindfulness is giving the work of SEL. That we're really making connections, you know, between all of this in a much, much more purposeful way. And Dan, my dear friend Dan Siegel, and by the way, what I want to say about Dan that I thought of this morning, and how many of you have heard him speak? And okay, you remember how he says how secure attachment and what he's seeing with the intervention of mindfulness, has lots of similarities. So I was really getting excited this morning when Paul was making a big deal around the secure attachment, because that's the only time I heard anybody say, well, yeah, that's what is the first choice. But as a person who knows a lot about secure attachment is Dan Siegel, he says, but I'm noticing that when people are exposed to contemplative practice, some of the same things are being mediated. That's big. That's way bigger now that I hear about Paul's work, by the way. So this is an important idea, right? And I'll just let you read it yourselves. It's this potential is created that these connections can transform a temporary state into a long-term trait of that individual. It's exactly what was just said by Adele. If we keep it in the prefrontal cortex, it's not a disposition yet. It's not like you say, you know what, that's a kind person. When you say that about somebody, you probably will never see them be unkind. They have completely embodied kindness, is probably what has happened. If not, you might say, if you don't know that for sure, you might say, that was a very kind thing you did, right? It's still being worked on. It's still in the prefrontal cortex. What should I do here? You know, I think I should let Linda go in the car, which you did last night, you know, saw how tired I was, you know. And you waited, Rob waited for another car to come, you know. It was certainly an act of kindness. And for the most part, I've never seen you unkind, so maybe it is a disposition, you know. I'm not a scientist, but, you know, I kind of studying it a little there. So if my time is up, it goes off? Is that the deal? Very interesting. Wow. That is something. That is a new trick. However, my mind is focused, and I've brought it back. So these are just some examples of the classroom. And what I think I should probably do, and this is a peace corner, when a teacher says, what do you mean there's no room? Look what she did. It's just fantastic, you know? And I think I'm going to not go into this. And for those of you that want to know more about that, come to my group tomorrow. You know what I mean? We'll talk a little bit about that. Because I'd like to end this part, and this is your cue for the DVD. I'd like to end this part with a 4.5-minute clip. And I am going to fast forward it really quickly. Oh, here it is. Because this is Congressman Ryan sitting in one of our classrooms in Ohio. I'm happy to say most of Ohio is doing just fine with mindfulness, including Youngstown and Warren school districts that we are in with a very large grant. And this is Congressman Ryan, who just this week submitted the Social and Emotional Learning Act to Congress of 2013. Yeah. And you better believe the word mindfulness is going to come up pretty soon. But he knows that this is the best way to go first. And so here he is, and now you're going to see him and the work we're doing in Ohio on about a 4-minute piece and bring you right into the classrooms of Youngstown and Warren city school districts.
In part 2 of our in-depth look, we see how mindfulness is being put into practice in the Youngstown and Warren city schools. Here's reporter Dan O'Brien.
Welcome to this special quiet time together. Let's lie down comfortably on the floor on your back.
The students here at Jefferson Elementary in Warren are quieting their bodies and their minds.
Breathe in, and now slowly let the air out.
It's part of a cutting-edge Skills for Life project funded through a government grant secured in 2009 for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. Jefferson and Williamson Elementary in Youngstown are the first to integrate the program with mindfulness, the subject of a new book by Congressman Tim Ryan. Linda Lantieri is the director of the Inner Resilience program in New York that helps train teachers in mindfulness methods.
I guess a simple definition of mindfulness would be to be in the present, we can train a part of our brain that is that relaxed alertness part of the brain that really helps us strengthen that aspect of being able to be fully present. Then all kinds of other good things begin to happen.
Crisscross applesauce, and then put your hands someplace comfortable.
The first year we did it, we noticed we had a much better behaved class than we'd ever had before. And so this is our second year into the program, and what I'm noticing, not only do I have better behaved class, I also have a class that's reading higher and writing higher than I ever had before.
What's that called when somebody makes you feel good about yourself? Put up.
What is happening is that the neural pathways that strengthen that part of the brain that helps kids learn is getting strengthened. It's like almost thinking about putting a deposit in the bank every time you do that.
Real deep. And blow it out.
We do the whole group meditation, and that just kind of teaches them how to relax and how to get their body calm and how to clear their mind. But we also have what's called the Peace Corner, where they can go do that when they need to.
The Peace Corner is an integral part of the program, with students also learning to be peacemakers.
We have to ask them questions before we help them fix it out.
Like what kind of questions?
Like, do you want my help? What happened? How do you feel? How can you solve the problem?
Is it nice to be a peace helper?
Yeah, but sometimes it's a little hard.
Say what? Mean Jean growled.
It's impacted their academics by allowing them to be able to focus more intently on their academic studies here and not focus so much on difficulties with other students or maybe stress that they're having within their own life. They're able to focus.
3 friends share.
When we started the program, we initiated it in full implementation this year. And I have to tell you, we are excited. Our staff is excited. Our students are excited. And our parents are excited because we are seeing the results of the program.
Williamson principal Wanda Clark says she's also noticed fewer kids being sent to the office, thanks to more tools for teachers.
You need some calm down time or you need some cooling off time, you can go over to the Peace Corner, which usually takes about maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then that child is ready to come back into the learning environment again.
The Peace Center is for when you are mad or when somebody is bullying you or if somebody hurt your feelings.
Teachers go through a 4-day training period in which they learn to manage their own stress.
It's contagious. It is contagious.
And as other teachers not in the program see the results, they're starting to use the techniques in their own classrooms.
I think a lot of them that the students, first of all, wouldn't be able to sit still or wouldn't really grasp the concepts, but more and more teachers are telling us how well the students are doing and how fast it's catching on and they're changing their behavior.
We also want to thank Congressman Ryan because this is something that he's a big proponent of, and we're excited. We're excited about the SEL program.
W-O-D-J-O-B. Good job.
Congressman Ryan says the program teaches students critical life and career skills, and it's important that funding continue until the program becomes self-sustaining.
We're reaping the benefits of that now because you see schools like Williamson, schools like Jefferson up in Warren that have been completely transformed. And you talk to the principals, you talk to the teachers, you talk to the parents. This stuff works.
For the Daily Buzz, I'm Dan O'Brien.
Good job. Good job.